protests like these achieve anything then, other than headlines, I suppose? Or do they, in fact, cause more harm than good to the local economy? Joining us now is the acting leader of the Green Party, Sean Berry, who says Extinction Rebellion has a clear goal to make their voices heard. And we're also joined by former Metropolitan Police Chief Inspector Mike Neville, who believes that this type of disruption frustrates people and does more harm than good. Good morning to both of you.
Morning.
Good morning.
Mike, first to you. It's interesting to read that. I think that the Met Police said that policing this, I think 2 years ago, they came to a figure, an enormous figure of like £50 million. It's extraordinary amount of money being spent, taxpayers' money, to police this. Is that worthy of the goals that Extinction Rebellion say they have?
Well, it's not, no. And of course, all that money and all those officers are dragged in from inner London council estates where they should be policing knife crime, burglary, robbery, drug dealing. And so it's always working class people who suffer because of these protests. That money should be better spent on them. We've got a group of champagne socialists, university students dancing around in central London, disrupting businesses. And the facts are they'll convince no one of their arguments that we should change the climate or whatever else, or stop using fossil fuels, because they'll just annoy people who for 18 months of not being able to go to work, just want to get on with their lives. And these silly disruptions achieve nothing more than making people's lives a misery in several ways. And it's just dreadful. Why can't they do it in Hyde Park? And then if people want to see them doing it, they can see them doing it there. By doing it in these areas, they're blocking off restaurants, they're blocking off shops, souvenir shops. You only have to look at the people who've been speaking, the businesses are going to lose tens of thousands of pounds. So that's working people laid off, and it's just an utter scandal. And it needs to stop, and the police need to be harsher and sort this out. These people have a right to protest, but go and do it somewhere, Hyde Park or something like that, where they're not going to disrupt businesses.
Sean?
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously saying there is a right to protest, but we're just coming out of a pandemic, aren't we? And, you know, there is that point about businesses getting back on their feet, the world just starting to get back to normal. Is this the right time to be doing a protest like this?
It couldn't be a more important time to raise the issue of climate chaos. Government policy on this does need to change. Now, as a Green Party politician, my role in democracy is different to Extinction Rebellion's. I try to win votes and change policy by being at the table, but the voice of the people is incredibly important. The right to protest on the streets is part of a healthy democracy, and no one wants to see that cracked down upon. That would be a mark of a state suffering from tyranny. It's the most archetypal image you can think of a failed state to be cracking down in that way. Now, I hear what Mike says about policing, but it is the police's choice to commit that much resource and these many costs to policing these demonstrations. Most of the people in the West End, in that area, are actually travelling on foot and by bike. And the only people I saw yesterday stopping people on foot from travelling to those businesses through those streets were the police. It's the policing choices that I want to question here. They ought to be facilitating this kind of democratic engagement. The voice of the people is incredibly important.
That's interesting, isn't it, Mike, that the police don't need to be spending all these man hours on what Sean is saying is, by and large, a very peaceful and democratic protest. So why are there, as Pip was just saying, you know, dozens and dozens of police officers there since the crack of dawn when, frankly, nothing is happening?
Well, firstly, they don't know what's happening, because people are they're not saying we're going to do this, we're going to do that. So the police are going to be ready for all sorts of things. The police have also got to block off the roads and direct traffic, because if somebody gets run over because some van goes up the wrong way, then of course the police will be to blame. The police are in a no-win situation. They have to bring in lots of resources because, as you said, there's been lots and lots of arrests yesterday, and so the police have to be ready to deal with whatever they're doing. And the consequences of that, as I've said, is that all those estates, which really need policing because young lads are dying from knife crime or people's lives have been made a misery through drug dealing, that is all put on hold while we're dealing with a load of silly champagne socialists who want to dance around a pink table. And
this needs to stop. You say that, Mike, and Sean will come back on this, but This is a group that now has 400 groups across 72 countries, from the Solomon Islands to Australia to Spain to South Africa to the US. You call it a silly disruption, but it seems, Sean, to be a worldwide movement.
It is. It's a global movement. And if Mike were to go down and speak to the protesters, he would find they are from all walks of life, including former police officers who I spoke to on the ground yesterday. There are young people, there are people right up to the oldest people you could imagine being on a protest, making their voices heard, because government policy needs to change. This year, we have the big United Nations conference. We need new commitments from governments, and governments need to hear the voices of the people, as well as politicians like me in elected chambers. This is part of a healthy democracy. We should be welcoming it, and the police should be managing the impact of the disruption, directing the traffic around these protests and not stopping people from walking down the streets and speaking to the protesters themselves. They're out there to talk to people, to change opinion too, and stopping them from talking to the general public isn't very healthy either, I don't think.
Sean, is there an issue, though, with losing public sympathy on this? Because although obviously people have a right to protest, make their voices heard, and, you know, the important issue about climate change, but also people have a right to be able to go about their lives, carry on going to work, carry on running their business. And there are those people getting in touch today. There's a message here from Jack. I totally understand the need for change when it comes to the climate crisis, but I genuinely believe Extinction Rebellion are detracting from the message rather than propelling it.
I think these protests I've seen so far this week have been incredibly good-natured and very, very engaging. I think, like the police, who've had numerous court judgments saying that their approach has been wrong, I think the protesters themselves have learned lessons from, you know, possible missteps and actions that weren't as popular in the past. They're looking to win the public over, and I am too. I'm trying to get elected. I'm trying to win votes. There are more and more Greens elected around the world, but we need action quicker than that. Current governments need to be listening to, and the voice of the people on the streets. It's democratic. It should be supported.
And Mike, just a final word to you. I mean, the environment and the climate change will affect us all, whether you are pro the policing cost or anti it. In the end, the climate, if we're to believe what we're seeing in front of our eyes, will affect all of our lives. I suppose it's wrong in a way to pit this up against, you know, sort of pro or anti the environment, isn't it, Mike? It is actually, we can all be pro the environment, but you want it to be handled differently.
Yes, I think so. I think we're all going to, you know, we don't want to waste things, we don't want to do things. But again, we see what people see, of course, if you're working, is that China and India have massive, you know, power stations burning coal and whatever else. And no one seems to be bothered about them. It's easy to protest in London where the police, you know, skateboard with you and whatever else. But most people just want to get on with their daily lives. They're happy not to waste things. They're happy to put things in recycling. But what they want to do is go back to work, earn a living and looking after their families, and not be disrupted by these characters with their pink table and whatever other silly stunts they're going to pull. And it's simply not going to convince anybody.
OK, well, I think there'll be lots of people nodding and shaking their heads with both of you this morning, and I think that's potentially the point of it. Thank you so much to Sean and to Mike for putting both sides of that debate forward this morning. Thank you.